Welcome back to another episode of our live show tonight with me, and for the third time we have a very special guest, and it's Andres Almiray, and we're talking about something he did in the last show. Welcome, Andres.
Hi, Marcos. How are you?
Hey, thanks.
How's everybody?
Wait, they cannot answer.
Thank.
Too bad. And the very first question I have to ask you, because nobody in the chat is asking questions so far, do you again have your very colored drink at hand that you had in the last two episodes?
I do. It's right here.
Oh, yeah, nice. And it's made completely without anything organic.
Uh, well, I mean, it's not fruit juice, but it's definitely organic. It's not synthetic.
Not? I thought so. It's like wall color or something. So Andres, cheers on the third time being here.
Yes.
Thank you. And you actually contacted me because you said maybe we should do a recap of what happened so far with your contribution to Maven that you developed in the other two episodes. And I already said in the teaser to this live show that it was actually merged, but there was a lot more to report than it was merged. So shall we start with why we did actually this contribution?
Yes. So I think it was earlier this year when I was testing out different microservices frameworks, specifically Micronaut. And one of the ways that you can deploy a Micronaut application is via an Uber jar or a fat jar. It's a jar that contains all the dependencies. Now, for this to work, they use the Maven Shade Plugin. And the way that the default settings for a Micronaut project work when using the Maven build tool is that the shaded plugin is always enabled, is always configured, and there is no way that you can skip it. Now, I wanted to test out a different deployment option where I needed the plain jar, not the Uber jar, not the fat jar. So I did not have any way to disable shading unless I redefine explicitly the shade plugin in my POM file, and then put some configuration that just make it do not work, or actually generate the Uber jar with a different name. So that will retain the original jar, which is what I wanted. So there is a workaround explicitly defining the shader plugin, but that's a lot of XML that you have to put in. And if you are a developer that does not know how the rules of defining Maven plugins and how inheritance or values come from parent POMs into your child POM, then this is definitely not a solution. So I thought, what if there was a way to disable the Maven Shade plugin, regardless of how it was defined, whether it's in your POM file, whether it's in a parent POM, or in the case of Micronaut, where it is defined by a lifecycle plugin, which is an extension.
Yeah.
So in order for this to work, we just needed to add one Boolean property to the Maven Shade plugin. Typically, the name will be a skip. If you set it to true, then the execution of the plugin will be a skip, which is what we want. And that will make things much, much easier and align with other Maven plugins that also expose a skip property. The most well-known out there is the skip tests for the Surfire Maven plugin.
Yeah. And I think we need to tell the other story, that the decision to actually do an implementation in that particular plugin was not the only option right from the start. I can remember back when we discussed on Twitter that the other option would be to make a generic property so you can skip anything. So that would be a major change to the Maven core, and the Maven people really did not like doing a major change like that one. So what you proposed was, well, not liked also, but it was the smaller change. And on the other hand, I chimed in and said I also need such a property because I'm a developer of the Maven Shade plugin, and I often have the problem that the Shade plugin is not working, and I need to quickly switch it off to see if the overall configuration is the problem, or if my additional feature is a problem that I'm developing. So we had completely different ideas why we need that property, but we both said we definitively want to have it. And this was when we met for the first time in Twitter and said, hey, let's do that thing. Or I think you said, I shall do that, and I said, you shall do that.
Yeah, something like that. So,
Yeah.
and we were, to be frank, we were very naive by then
Sure.
because we both saw, hey, this sounds like the only thing that we need is to add a Boolean property. I mean, how hard can it be?
Yeah.
And then check the status of that property at the beginning of the execution so that we know if we continue or we should skip it. Now, when you say it that way, that sounds quite trivial.
Yeah.
And we
Sure.
thought that was the case, right?
Yeah, sure. And we thought we will do from scratch to the merge in about 60 minutes. And we were a bit wrong with that estimation. And I can remember in the first show we needed 90 minutes, I think, until we had the implementation and the tests and the documentation and the pull request. And we hope that it's no problem that the Maven team will just press on merge and we can do the second show to tell everybody it's done. But actually it was not that easy. I can remember on a quite lively discussion in the Maven mailing list where you were asked to change a lot of things.
Yeah, but before we go into that discussion is, yeah, so adding the Boolean property was quite simple. Checking the status of the Boolean property at the beginning of the execution is also simple, but writing the test cases, that was an eye-opener because we wanted to do it by the book. So we added a unit test case.
Yeah.
And we looked at some of the unit test cases that were provided by the plugin itself. And turns out that the way that we're testing internal state was via reflection tricks. Mm-hmm. So you will explicitly instantiate the plugin without the rest of the Maven plumbing, and then invoke the plugin or use reflection to set private fields, because that's how you will typically define parameters in a plugin, using private fields. And then again, use reflection to check the internal state in case that's something, well, checking the expectations of the execution or whatever it is now. So we saw that, and we wrote our own. And then we also followed the other advice, which is create an integration test. So instead of just using reflection tricks, in an integration test, you write an actual Maven project, which is a sub-project of the Maven plugin project, and it gets executed using the Maven Invoker plugin. So in the end, we can test the real changes on the real Maven project, but it's still part of the overall Maven Shade plugin testing facilities. So we don't have to publish a snapshot version and then do another test separately. So everything is comprised within the same project. So that was good. And we thought, hey, we have it. So let's push this. Let's create a pull request, and let's ask for review. And we thought, well, this is going to be easy, right? Maybe it takes a couple of days, because everybody in the Maven community works just because they like the tool, and everything is volunteer work. Then no one is getting paid to write these tools and write these plugins. This is very, very important. So we're doing this because we truly believe in open source, and everybody else does the same. So we knew that an answer would not come quickly. It might take a couple of days, maybe a couple of weeks, depending on the time frame of everybody that will need it to get in touch. And that's exactly what happened. couple of days later, a couple of weeks later, we got some comments about what we did.
Yeah, that's right. And actually, I was convinced that the way we did it on the show was really brilliant and great, and they would love it. So I was, well, not to say pissed off, but I really thought, why don't they love it? I was, let's say, confused about that. And it took me several days to understand that they are right with their comments. It's a thing that I often have with open source, that when I do a pull request, I think it's so really great. Everybody must love it. And well, I often need to learn that there are different views on the work you did. And so it was the case here, and they disliked, for example, that we used the bean shell language. And we thought it's a good thing and it's common in the Maven universe, but actually we learned that they want to have it in Groovy. And this is just one change they did. And for me, I don't dare to say I'm a Groovy hater, but I never did something with Groovy and the imagination to learn a new computation language just for that single test was like, wow. So it was interesting to see that in the second show you picked up all the comments and you actually were able to do Groovy somehow by incident. So that was a nice thing to watch you picking up that thing so easily, and everything they said was okay for you, and you just did that. So this was something I learned from you, to calm down and accept the other views and try to understand what I want to have and learn Groovy and,
Right.
and do what they need.
So two things. First, so I learned Groovy back in 2006, and I joined the Groovy development team
Yeah.
in 2007. I think sometime mid-year. So I've been using the language for quite some time. I mean, it's like 15 years already since I've been doing this.
That's quite a bit of time, right?
Right, exactly. So picking up what they wanted to do in that particular piece of code wasn't really that hard for me because I have plenty of history with the language.
Yeah.
But also the way that there were other test cases written in Groovy. So even if we didn't know how to do Groovy stuff, just by looking at the other test cases, it became quite simple to replicate that. So to migrate from Bean Shell into Groovy, the way that the specific test cases were written is not that hard.
Yeah,
So that was
right.
a good thing.
That's right.
The other thing is that, yes, we were a bit surprised by the initial feedback. We thought it was a bit negative, but the reason why is because we both were just looking at the very narrow set of use cases, our use cases, which is okay, but the Maven team, the other volunteers, were looking at a much bigger picture. And some of the changes even that we provide, even though they seem trivial to us, they could potentially cause other problems down the road. And what the Maven team was trying to prevent is people getting into trouble because an apparently seemingly innocuous, very trivial change will just snowball into something that could make their builds bad. So we went a bit back and forth with that feedback and asking why is this thing and trying to understand, and they were giving us the explanations. And I'm very, very happy that everything is documented in the pull request. So now everybody that participated in that discussion was on the same page. So once we knew what needed to be done, what needed to be updated in the PR, we just did it on the second show. And so we failed to send the pull request on that show.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Because my paid Zoom time went out, I think.
Yes, but we were so close. I think we were missing 5 to 10 minutes more just to wrap it around. And so I did it offline. And the only comment that I got afterwards is that I think we had 3 commits. So they asked me to squash them into one commit.
Yeah.
So that their history will be more linear. So that's what I did. I forced push because, well, you're rewriting history. And after I did that, I think it was, who was? Oliver, I think it was Oliver Lamy.
Yeah.
He was the one that made the release. So he was looking at other issues that were related to the Maven Shade plugin, and ours was part of the latest release. And so that was it. So once we took all the feedback and we made all the changes, the last push was very, very simple to do.
Yeah, yeah. And actually, I missed that moment. I have not so closely followed that PR to really notice when it got merged. Can you remember when this happened actually?
It has to be close to a month ago. So that would have been mid-July.
Mid-July. Okay, okay. So I think what people want to know is if they want to use our new property, if there is a public release already available on Maven Central with
Yes.
that. Yeah, really.
Yes. Yes.
So
There is.
this is the release you said which was done by Oliver Lamy.
Yes.
Ah,
So
I
the
see.
latest version of the Maven Shade plugin is 3.2.4. Oh, wait a second. Maven. So I'm looking at mavenrepository.com. I don't see it. The latest release from mavenrepository.com that listed is June from last year, 2020. So that is not the case. I thought there was already a release for this, so I might have been mistaken.
Or maybe the repository you're searching is outdated.
That could be another way. So I'm looking now into Central, and the Maven Shade plugin. No, that's not the one.
But
No.
let me demonstrate for those who are not so familiar with what you're doing. I will just switch to the Maven Central to show what you are doing, even if you don't see our faces anymore. So what it is, it's this page. If you don't know it, search Maven.org. You can just type Maven Shade Plugin, and then you can see that here is the plugin. And yes, you are right. The latest one is 3.2.4 from May 2020. So
Yeah, it's not there yet.
it's not there yet, unfortunately. It would be nice if it would be there. Maybe we should open an issue and request that they release it.
So our pull request was finally merged in July 19. And it wasn't Oliver Lamy. It was Tibor. Tibor
Right.
Digan was the one that did the match. Now I thought so because I saw a discussion going on in the Maven list that they wanted to make a release of Shade plugin. That's why I raised my hand again. Hey, by the way, there's M Shade 382, which is the issue that we opened. Is ready for another review in case that you would like to include it in this release. Now, there haven't been a couple of other pull requests, Shade 396, and a couple of dependencies, but I guess the latest version of the Shade plugin that contains our fix is not yet published.
Yeah, I think that they are waiting to get more pull requests in before they
No,
do the release.
there is a release on GitHub, Maven Shade 330. But
That's interesting.
yeah, because our pull request was merged later. Wasn't that the case? On July 19th, so 5 days later. Right. Now, I don't see 330 on Maven Central. So I don't know what's going on here.
And maybe they had problems with the QA and stopped it in the pre-publication phase. So it's maybe just still in a stage where they are fixing something before they release it actually into the Maven Central, I could imagine.
Yeah, that's quite an interesting. So yeah, we definitely can reach out to the team, ask them first what's going on with
Yeah.
330, and secondly is that if you're planning to push out, I don't know, it could be 340 or 331,
Yeah.
that will contain our fix.
Yeah, that's the thing that often happens in open source. Uh, in many projects, you cannot actually plan the day when you really get the thing in your hand. For example, I contributed something to the Jersey project and they accepted it and it's in their code base, but the release that they want to do with it is planned for last June. So it's actually there, but it's not published. So this is something you have to live with open source. That it's there when it's there. So it's like the question when will the next Debian release be made? It's done when it's done, right?
Yes, indeed. I mean, well, it depends. So there are some open source projects that do not have any commercial backing,
Yeah,
and they still are able to go with a particular release cadence. So it's every third Thursday of the month, or it's at the end of the month of every 3 years, of every 3 months, or every 6 months, whatever. They pick a period and they try to comply with that. So every feature that is ready for that particular time frame, it goes. And if it's
yeah,
not ready, it goes into the next release train.
yeah,
And there are other open source projects we simply say, we will publish a release until we got a certain set of features ready. And it will take as long as needed for those features to be ready. And once that is the case, then we make a release.
yeah.
That's typically the case for many of the Maven plugins. There is a bunch of features that some of them go together, and it makes sense to put them into the same release. So we wait until all of them are ready for that the next release to happen.
But in the case of Maven, actually, I think it's a bit more chaotic. Actually, I never learned what the point is when they will do really a release and when do they do a major release and a minor release and a bug fix release. I think that's completely random. They just stand up in the morning and think, well, it's a nice day, let's do a release. I cannot follow their discussions. It's just like somebody pops up in the mailing list and writes, everybody okay with me doing a release? And some guys say, well, if you like, just do it. And the next day you have a release. And some releases has 50 bug fixes and some releases just have two. And I don't know. I think this is really the mood of the programmers. They just have the feeling that a release would be nice, so let's do it. And with other plugins, there are lots of bug fixes in the code base, and nobody thinks it's a good idea to do a release, so you wait for 2 or 3 years. So this is something you have to live with.
Yeah, yeah. And specifically, for example, let's bring in the case of the Maven J-Link plugin, which was created
Yeah,
close to 4 years ago. And it stayed in 3.0.0 alpha state for close to 4 years.
yeah,
And then I think it was 9 months ago or so, whenever we started a discussion online, again on Twitter, and we got some people excited, some of the team members, so that we eventually pushed 3.0.0 final
mm,
out the door. They added a few changes, a few items that needed to be fixed in order to be actually called 3.0.3 final. But that describes exactly what you said, is a plugin that was close to ready, and yet it took close to 4 years for it to have a final release.
yeah. This is something that the normal user cannot follow because in our main jobs or in our paid jobs, we have these tight plans and things must be done by the evening or by next Monday. And in the open source world, there are no such plans because if nobody pays for something, nobody can give you a plan. So they just do what they think is best to do next. And the Maven guys really do a good job, but they only have two hands, just like you and me, and they work their spare time full time on a lot of other things. So some plugins just never will be released because they have lots to do in other plugins. Or at least I imagine that this is the course that creates this more or less chaos in the release chains.
Yeah, some of that is true. There is a handful of maintainers for a series of projects. There are plugins that are more popular and there are more eyeballs and more people either contributing code or test cases or at least helping in one way or another. And there are other plugins that do not see so much traffic yet. They are still important.
Yeah.
So perhaps one of the lessons learned that we have from this is that if you are a consumer of these plugins, of a Maven plugin, and you find there's something that is not working properly, there's something that is missing, for example, the skip feature in Shade, well, go through the issue tracker for that particular project and see if that feature or that bug has already been recorded. If that is the case, then perhaps add more context to it. Not just ask, hey, when is this thing going to be released? That is not really helpful.
Yeah,
Rather, say, hey, I tested this again with this environment and I encountered the same error or a similar error or whatever, right? So let them know I'm interested. This thing is bugging me or is it doesn't allow me to do what I want. And if I can, I would like to help. How can you help?
yeah,
Testing, that's the first thing.
yeah,
Just let us know, is this thing still alive or not? Second thing is that if you have the time, provide the test case if it's not already there, and maybe provide a fix. And again, engage in that conversation. So talk to the team before you start writing code. That
yeah,
is the best recommendation. Because maybe you have an idea how to fix things, and that's okay. But it might not be in the same idea or in the same way that the team would like the things to be fixed. And you will be angry once you have written all the code and they'll tell you, thank you, but we would like you to make these changes. Or thank you, but all these changes will definitely make things more difficult to us down the road because X, Y, and Z. And when this happens, you could avoid all this by engaging in an earlier conversation. And even after that earlier conversation, and it will tell you, thank you, but we would like you to make these changes. Don't be discouraged. Try to understand why these changes are needed. It might be the case that it happened to us, that you only have a small set of use cases and they are looking at a much bigger picture.
yeah. In the last show, I had Roman Kenke here from the OpenJDK team, and he said one interesting point, and I think while he talked about OpenJDK in particular, I think the point is valid for nearly every open source project. Those people that are not working frequently on open source, they think that they can just grab the code, look into it for an hour or two, write some code lines, make a drop by pull request. So they are not really into the project. They just see a few code lines and think, well, I write another code line and that will work, and they should be happy to get that code from me. And this is not working. And certainly for OpenJDK in particular, it's not working because millions of developers rely on that code base, right? So they have to care about really high quality standards. But I think actually that what Roman said is valid for every open source project. If you want to contribute, you need to understand the big picture. And this is something I'm struggling always with new open source projects, that I want to do such a drop by pull request. And it's just not working because you always get back something like, well, nice code, but it actually breaks everything.
Yeah.
So we really want to encourage you to become an open source contributor. Please do that. Go into an open source project, but don't do drop by pull requests. really go into the code, try to understand the project and its structure and all the helper classes that are there and the way they write tests and the way they want to have it documented. You have to understand that. I know that this is a lot of time, but it won't work in another way, because if everybody just drops in some code lines, then the project would be unmaintainable. It would just break and nobody could fix it. And I think this is something that I have to get better with. And it was something that I learned from the work with you, Andres, just to sit down and understand they are not hostile. They're your friends. They want to help you, but they want to keep the code base sane. So I have to read what do they say, what do they want, why do they want it that way and on my way, and do what they said. So this is hard for me because I am always used to be the boss of my code, and now other guys are coming saying, no, this is not nice what you're doing. But even if you invest that lot of time, doing open source is really great. So what I hope, what you will take from these 3 shows is that you should join what Andres is doing. Concentrate on the code and work with the team, and it will be beneficial for everybody, because we are not the only ones that can do that, and we're not the only ones that wanted to have this particular contribution to that plugin, and we need you. We cannot fix everything for you in the shows. We really need you. So I'm really thankful that you're here for the 3rd time to convince people to do open source. And I actually think we're now in a situation where we have to decide if we further try to convince people to open source, or if we want to go into our actual contribution and explain people how to actually use it. So I leave it open to you where to go from here.
Right. So that comment of making that drop by contribution, that seemed like what we were about to do the first time,
Yeah.
because again, the change is so trivial. We ended up adding 7 lines of production code. That's really nothing.
Yeah.
It does something, but it's really that little. But we ended up writing 4 more times test code for those 7 lines of code, if it's not more. So that shows that if we just added the production code, our pull request will have been immediately shut down. And the Maven team will have been as, what's going on here? Guys, where are the test cases? Are you sure you didn't break anything? Yes, your change looks very trivial, but we cannot be really sure nothing else has been affected by a simple change, right? So that's why we need test cases. And we did. We wrote unit tests and we wrote integration test cases. And the great thing about this contribution is that because we engaged in a conversation with the Maven team, we were able to get a bit more of insight into the big picture, the things that they were looking at, the things that they were taking care of that we didn't know before. And we learned how to run a single integration test case, which we didn't know before. And in your case, Marcus, you got a glimpse of how to translate Java code into Bean Shell into Groovy code, right?
Yeah.
This was trivial. And now I hope that everybody else that saw the show can see that when confronted with the option, because it might happen eventually, that you go from Java to Groovy or any other JVM language, don't think that, oh, I have to learn this whole new language just to change one single test case.
Yeah.
That does not happen, or does not have to happen all up front. You might just need a few things.
The telephone number of Andres.
What?
Yeah, because you can write the Groovy code, so I don't have to learn it.
And so I'm quite happy with what we did. because of the knowledge that we both have on Maven and Groovy and a few other things. We only took us what in overall like 2 hours worth of time doing things back and forth, plus the time for the feedback. Of course, that took over a few days. And when you compress everything into what we did, it's what 2 days perhaps worth of work for an open source contribution.
Yeah.
And this is something that anybody could do.
Yeah.
If you know Java, if you know a little bit of Maven, if you know perhaps a little bit of Groovy, you can certainly get on with a Maven plugin and try to provide a new fix or a feature. It might take you perhaps a bit more time if you do not know something. It's just a matter of learning. Maybe there's a longer feedback cycle, but in the end, I will certainly assure you that the experiences that you gain while working in open source projects can be directly translated into the skills that you learn and you can use in your daily work.
Yeah, this is an interesting aspect actually that I can second. The work with Andres in the Hacker Garden and in the shows always led to new insights on my side. I did not actually write code, but I watched him writing code. So doing open source actually is what I think the best way to learn new skills for work actually. Yeah, that's right. Good point.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
I lost mine. I forgot what I wanted to say actually.
That's one of the things that I like to tell people when they get into open source,
Yeah.
or why could they or should they work in open source. Open source is definitely not for everyone. Why? Because if you are lucky enough to be paid to do open source, then this is something that you can do in your 9 to 5 work job, and that's okay.
Yeah.
But if you are not lucky enough, then you are like us. You do open source in your free time, and you decide when that will happen. And that means you sacrifice your free time instead of spending time with your family, your friends, or doing whatever you like to do in your free time. You are again back and glued into your computer. Now, is that worth it? It's up to you to decide how much time you want to invest. Because again, working in open source gives you two kind of benefits. You're helping a community that relies on that code base. But do not lose sight of the second benefit, is that you are helping yourself, learning new skills, learning new stuff that then you can use later in your daily work. And that can lead you into a better paycheck, into a better job, into other opportunities that could probably take much longer to arrive, or sometimes will never come if you were not being ready because you were working in open source. Again, I will encourage all of you to give it a try. You may like it and you may continue to do it, or you may not like it and then just say open source is not for me, and that's still fine. That's okay. Not everyone has to jump into open source, but if you have the option, I will say take it.
Yeah.
You don't know where exactly this could lead you. Now, take it for me. I'm Mexican. I'm living in Switzerland. As many years pass by between when I was in Mexico and where I am today, and I can definitely say the only reason why I'm here, and I know all these people, I know Marcus, and I know all the things that I know, is because I decided to jump into open source. I still work in commercial source code. I still do that, but I also work in open source. So you can do both. You decide.
Yeah. And but at first I need to say I didn't know that you're Mexican actually. It's interesting. I always learn new things from Andres. No, what I wanted to say is there are two more things that are interesting in doing open source. The first thing is I don't know if it's a German thing, but I know a lot of people playing with miniature trains in their spare time. So they're building landscapes with trains in it and all that. So this is a great hobby for lots of people, at least in Germany. And I feel the same when I'm doing open source. It's my landscape that I'm forming. I I I, I feel that there must be a change here in the Maven landscape, so I build it. This is my way of playing with miniature trains. I don't have a train, I have Maven. So this is point number one. And point number two is you need to imagine the power that we actually have. We all are pissed off bad software, right? I know commercial software is lacking features and bugs endless, right? While I'm paying for maintainers and nothing happens. But in the open source world, we have the power to add the features that we like and to fix the bugs that we hate on our own. And now imagine one thing. I read one time that there are several millions of programmers able to do Java better or worse. So we have millions of Java developers. And if every Java developer is fixing a single bug in an open source project, then this is millions of bugs less. So the power of open source compared to commercial software is huge. And this
Yeah.
is what I think people need to understand. If everybody takes just 1 hour per week to do open source, which is not much, if you play soccer or tennis or something, you will spend a full day on the tennis court, right? So just spend 1 hour per week fixing bugs in open source. This is enough. And this will make open source really rule compared to closed source. And this is a major point that I always try to convince people to do a bit more. Not to do it like a hobby like I do, spending 8 or 16 hours per week. Just one hour is enough. So try it's really worth it.
Yeah, that's a good thing. Um, it's like if you like to jog or walk outside, when you start, you just do it with a short distance, and after some time, either you walk a much longer distance, or you just drop it. You simply say, "Well, this is too much effort. I'd rather just do it in just 1 or 2 times a week, or it's just one time, whatever it is that you reduce the period, right?" It's the
Mm.
same thing here with open source.
Yeah.
You can give it a try a couple of times, and if you like it, then you decide how often you want to do it. But at the minimum, 1 or 2 hours a week or a full day in a month, that's still good.
Yeah. Yeah. Actually, I'm interested in how many time are you spending in open source?
It varies. There were years where I will definitely go back to bed around 3 in the morning and
Oh
start
my god.
hacking at like 8, 9 in the evening because I'm a night owl. And
Yeah.
at night is where my head just explodes with ideas. And if I don't take it out, then I can't sleep.
Yeah.
So I did that for quite some time. And then I also sacrificed weekends. And so I recognized that at some point I took it too far.
Mm.
And I went back and said weekends are for completely for other stuff. I may still do things in the evenings, and then there were a time where I simply said I'm not going to do anything. This month is completely off. I'm not going to do any open source work just because.
Yeah.
Nowadays, I'm trying to come out again with a balance where I do things in the evenings. Maybe I do something in a Sunday because I'm just have been very lazy and I enjoy a very laid back weekend. And I say a couple of hours is enough for this.
Mm.
Again, you have to decide for yourself how you
Yeah.
feel about this, how you manage your own time.
Yeah. And this is the interesting point. As we control our spare time on our own, we can decide how much we invest in open source. And it was the same for me. There was a time when I spent 4 or 6 hours a day doing open source, and there was a time where I completely stopped it. And in the moment, I can say I invest 1 hour per day in open source, but then I deliberately stopped because there's also a family which wants to see you, and there are other hobbies I want to do, like doing shows in the evening, for example, or recording videos. So it's a nice thing that you can chuckle with it. If you have more spare time, you can do more fixes, and it don't have any spare time in a month, then there is nobody forcing you to do any code. So that's really a great addition to your life, that you can just do it when you have time and when you have the mood to do it.
Yep.
So it's my greatest hobby, and I still love it even after, well, about 25 years or so doing open source now. And even if there were times where I hated it completely because I only had arguments with a lot of other committers, I still came back and I chimed into code again. And I really can only ask you, please join the open source project that you are using as a consumer. Join it as a programmer and contribute a bit of your spare time, and it will make the open source world run a little bit more smooth. So
Right.
this was a real large walk around open source, because what we all actually wanted to answer is why it needed so much time from our first contribution to publishing it on Maven Central.
Right. And that is because there are so many people involved in this. It's not just the two of us. But if this were a project where the two of us were the ones that could say everything about it, there could probably have been a release many months ago.
Yeah.
And maybe it had worked. Maybe someone else will come back and, hey, thank you for this release, but it broke
Yeah.
this use case that I have. Could you please fix it? Right.
Yeah.
And so if you decide to enter into open source, my recommendation is, like what Marcus said, is if you're using an open source project in your daily work and you find that something is not working properly or there's a missing feature, that perhaps might be your first entrance. And say, either you say, I want to help in any way that you can.
Yeah.
The next option is create your own open source project. And why would you create an open source project? Is because you have a problem. There is an itch that you want to scratch, and the existing software out there does not cover your use case. Or it does it, but it's not performant, or it does it in a way that does not fully match what you need. So you build the software and then decide, hey, let's make it open source. Why? Because likely someone else has the same problem that you solve. And that someone else will find your project and will tell you, thank you, and could you fix this thing? Or they might come back and say, hey, there is this feature that is missing. Would you like a pull request? That's also something that can happen.
Yeah. Yeah. That's right. That's right. Start your open source project now. I I'm very good in starting open source projects with solutions that nobody needs, and I don't get any pull requests for that. And this is another story, actually. So, Andres, this was really an interesting hour, or nearly hour, and I wonder, actually, as you're so into open source, if you like to do some more open source in the next Java land, because I am searching for contributions for community activities. And we have the call for papers open since yesterday. So if you're interested, I could arrange for you that we do another hacker garden.
Oh, yeah. I'm definitely in. Sign me up.
Yeah, I'll do that. And everybody of you is really welcome to send your ideas for community activities for the next Java line to me. You know my email address, just drop a line with your ideas what a community should do in the next Java land, and we will welcome you there. So it was a really, really interesting discussion, Andres. Is there something that you want to tell the world before we call it the day?
Well, first off, thanks for watching. I hope that you like the content and the rest of the videos that you see in Marco's channel, and specifically what we did for Maven Shade. We hope, but we get in touch with the team behind the plugin and figure out when our feature could be released, and so that we both will be able to fulfill the use cases that prompted us to start this feature, and to learn what we learned with the experiences that we had building this feature. And I guess that it's just a matter again of repeating what we said before. Open source works. It has its pros and cons, like everything else, for sure. Don't overdo it, but certainly give it a try.
Sure, thanks. And I will second that. Give it a try. And if you want that Andres comes back into this show for the fourth time, then you should challenge us and tell us what we shall hack live in one of the next shows. So, Andres, thank you for being here. And guys, have a good time and good night. And as always, party on. Goodbye. Good night,
Party on,
guys.
people.